In this week's presentation, we will be looking at the social emotional development of infants and toddlers. So this is our third section on infant toddler development, and then next week we'll move on to early childhood, which is 2 to 6 years old. So for today, just a reminder, we are looking at infants and toddlers, which is 0 to 2-year-old development. If you're looking at it through the lens of theory, we're looking at psychosocial theorists such as Erikson, Vygotsky, also known as emotional development of children, social emotional development of children. Any of those terms or indicators are referring back to the same thing. We'll look at temperament, which is a pretty important part of development, social bonding and how that process works and what happens, and then also attachment. So you'll notice in this week's module, you have a handout that will sort of guide you through the work for this week's module as we go and work through the PowerPoint together. So pull that out and have it handy. You're able to type on it from Canvas because it is a Word document, or you can print it and handwrite it. I'm fine with that, and then take a picture and submit it. You can also annotate. So whatever's the easiest for you to engage with that document, please do, and I'm flexible about how you submit it. So we'll start by reviewing Erikson a little bit. There's a couple of questions on your walkthrough handout that will help you to kind of get a feel again for Erikson and his theory, since it's been a couple weeks since we've talked about him, and how that looks and relates to infants and toddlers. So early emotional development is pretty important. Over here on the right-hand side, you can see this diagram, and this is typically what we know about how children develop emotionally. We know that they do, in fact, experience reactive pain and pleasure. So babies, for example, before they're able to talk, do react to pain, and they also react to pleasure. So this is why when they have to burp, they're fussy, or when they are happy, you might see giggles or smiles. When something feels good, they feel better and are more calm. So we do know that they're experiencing emotions from a young age, far before they're able to speak to us and tell us that. Relationships and experiences are extremely, extremely important during this stage between 0 to 2 years old, more important than in any other stage of life and of development. And the big kind of thing that they're developing, the big milestone that they're developing during this stage of life and this age is social awareness. And so we'll talk about that today a little bit more as we go through this work. So Erikson and emotions. So this is sort of just a table that shows basic emotional development for babies by age and months. And this is, again, they may be experiencing some of these emotions earlier, but this is the age at which we're able to see them. So we see babies as young as 4 to 8 months old, for example, express anger or being frustrated with something. Between 9 and 14 months, we see them develop a fear of social events. So this connects pretty strongly back to Erikson's stages, and so you're going to have a question related to that on your handout to walk through. So anger and sadness obviously are visibly known and are often referred to in negative ways, right? We see these or feel that these are negative emotions, and that's not necessarily the case. So what happens in the human body when we have stress or anxiety or something that excites us, or an emotional rush or adrenaline or whatever it may be, is that the body releases what's called cortisol, and that's the stress hormone in the body. And so the body releases cortisol, and cortisol goes and attacks those receptors that are having that kind of response that's creating those emotions, or that heightened alertness, and it calms the body down, so that cortisol almost kills those negative receptors or feelings, and then we are able to settle a little bit. So there's fluctuations always over time, each day, by weeks, etc., in cortisol, and that's normal. And there's not necessarily a problem with that. What happens when children are exposed to this over time and extended periods of time is that anger can develop in response to some of those fluctuations or those experiences. And that's okay, and we want that. So we want to sort of encourage the production of that frustration and that anger and teach healthy ways to manage it. If they don't learn healthy ways to manage that anger, it can in fact switch to sadness. And sadness can create a lot of negative impacts long-term in the body. It produces physiological stress on the body. Angry infants or sad infants, typically those with depressed mothers, become fearful toddlers. And so there's some direct correlations here to Erikson's theory and his stages that are pretty important for us to note. And so again, none of these things are bad inherently. They're totally normal experiences and normal emotions, but we want to make sure that we're handling them and that we're dealing with them and that we're teaching the babies ways to express those and to still continue to function properly despite having those emotions. So we'll look at that a little bit later in the PowerPoint and in a video this week. Fear is another normal emotion that we see develop in infants and toddlers. Babies develop separation anxiety usually by 18 months. In the text, it says it becomes most obvious between 9 and 14 months. I have never really experienced it with any of my kids or foster kids over all the years that I've had them, as young as 9 months old. Typically, it's after 1 in my experience. Definitely between 12 and 18 months. By 18 months, you're absolutely going to see it. And this goes back to what we talked about in a prior week, and that's object permanence. So we sort of alluded to this just a little bit in a previous chapter. As babies develop object permanence and are aware and have a keen awareness that a caregiver is absent or missing or is no longer around, they develop this sense of fear and separation anxiety. So if they don't have the concept of object permanence developed yet, they're most likely not going to develop separation anxiety either. And so that's just something to keep in mind. We have talked the past couple of weeks about how closely related cognitive development is in other areas, and this is an example of that. So just keep that in mind. It is normal. We do want to see it. We absolutely want to see separation anxiety and fear. It's considered normal from 9 months all the way up until 3 years old. So if at 3 years old, we still have a child that's having significant separation anxiety, lots of crying when the caregiver leaves, issues being away from the caregiver or separating even in something that seems like a fun activity, we would probably want to take a closer look at that and see what's going on. Stranger wariness is not the same extreme as stranger anxiety or separation anxiety, but it is something that's also very normal. This is just simply a fear of unfamiliar people. And it doesn't have to be a big fear. So like you see kind of here in this photo, and as it states, it could just be an expression of concern. So if you've ever walked up to someone who's holding a child, an infant or a toddler, and reached out or said hello, and they kind of turn their head a little bit or pull their hands in or bury their head in mom or dad's shoulder, that is what we're talking about. That's stranger wariness. So it just is an awareness of, this is a person I don't really know that well, or you came up kind of quickly and I'm a little bit unsure. And this is very normal. It's a normal and healthy part of emotional development. We absolutely want to see it in children. Self-awareness develops between 15 to 24 months. Children typically who look in a mirror during this age and stage and are starting to develop self-awareness will touch their own faces. So at first they might touch the mirror, right, or reach out to that baby in the mirror, but they develop this awareness of that person in the mirror is me, and they start to touch themselves, okay, and realize, like, if I touch myself, it's the same as the mirror, right? I think that's me. So younger than 12 months, we typically don't ever see that. They will never acknowledge their own faces, but between 15 and 24 months, they will start to know that this person is me. I think this is me. You'll see this in pretend play also. And in the use of language, you'll hear pronouns. So they'll say I, mine, me, and those things are all, again, a normal part of development of self-awareness. So again, awareness of self is an emotional skill that's developing, but obviously with the use of language, which is a cognitive skill, they're closely related. If the self-awareness is not developing, you're not going to hear those pronouns. And so even though we do have separate and very distinct domains of development, there's quite a lot of overlap between all of them. The Rouge test is a way of actually testing how much self-awareness a child has and whether they do in fact have it or not. So you'll have a video related to this in your Canvas module that you can watch. But at both of these photos, you can see the babies have a rouge, right? A mark with lipstick or makeup on their forehead. And babies who have developed self-awareness will touch their foreheads and have a knowledge of, there's something on my head, right? There's something on my face. Babies who haven't developed it yet have no idea. They totally ignore it, don't pay any attention to it. So temperament is sort of the same thing as personality. As an adult, we call it personality. As a child, we call it temperament styles. And so these are just simply differences between people. We have differences in emotion, differences in activity levels, differences in self-regulation. We respond to environments differently. So for example, some people are morning people, right? They kind of get up, jump out of bed, they go, and they're good with that. Others take a really long time to wake up, very slow, prefer to be up at late at night, maybe, and sleep in the morning. In a new situation or environment when things are unexpected. Some people react with zeal, right? They're super excited. They run into the environment. I'm here. What's going on, right? I'm kind of excited about this. Let's party. Other people, very quiet, very intimidated by that, maybe stand off to the side, spend some time kind of looking at things and taking stock of what's going on before they kind of engage. So totally normal differences. They're all biologically based. So if you think back to that nature versus nurture controversy we talked about, um, this is all nature. Okay, you're born with these type of temperament and personality characteristics. Um, so the difference, temperament is genetic. Okay, that's what you're born with, your own preferences and individual personality, and what your preference and experience level is like. Okay, that's all nature driven. Personality is developed more over time, right? So this should make sense when you think about growth, right, and development. And then as you get closer to being an adult, you change kind of, you tweak your temperament a little bit or change it situationally, right? So I may know socially that when I walk into a new place, there's a certain way to behave or a certain expectation or a certain way that we sit or place that we wait, right? So those are all things that develop over time with social experiences. So you're not necessarily born with all of those. And your personality may change depending on who you're with, right? So with some friends, you might be super excited and outgoing and really laughy and bubbly. And with others, you may be more quiet and reserved. So the environment around you, the people around you, those that you're interacting with, really kind of determine what pieces of your personality come out at that time. And what people around you see. So just keep in mind, temperament and personality are not exactly the same. Your temperament you can't change, right? That's ingrained in you. That is definitely genetically driven. I can't change that I'm a type A personality and that I'm organized, et cetera, et cetera. But I can tweak my behavior or my personality in any given situation, kind of depending on the expectations, the social norm, the group I'm with, et cetera. So hopefully you see the difference between those two. Babies, we're absolutely looking at temperament. They have no social information, right, to make any different decisions or changes. And so everything we see for babies is going to be driven by their temperament, okay, what they're naturally born with. So as we move forward here, you will have a temperament test that you can go take online. Super interesting, really kind of fun. It'll give you some details that you may or may not already know. It relates back to kind of what we did at the beginning of the semester with your learning style. Okay, so you'll have an opportunity to learn more about yourself. This is just a temperament chart that gives some examples of what I was talking about. So there's 9 different ways that we evaluate temperament in infants, and you'll have a handout related to this as well that lists these. These are just 9 different differences or different characteristics we can see as it relates to temperament. So rhythm, maybe babies have a really regular schedule, or maybe they're super unpredictable. Adaptability, I already mentioned. What do you do when you're in a new experience or a new environment? Intensity of reaction. So some children, you could just barely bump them and they go hysterical, right? Like it's the worst thing ever. You'd think they had a broken leg. Other kids I've seen and been around can actually have a broken leg and not respond. Like they don't cry. You know, you ask them like, "Are you okay?" And they're like, "Yeah, I'm fine. Why? What's wrong? Your head's bleeding, right? Like, are you sure you're okay?" So these are the differences. And obviously with each characteristic, there's a huge span, right? So activity level can be moving constantly or moving hardly ever. And there's a huge span in between that's all considered normal. Okay, so there's a lot of differences between temperaments. They're all categorized into 3 types though. Okay, so although we have all the different types, we do categorize them into 3 main and specific temperaments. So flexible is the first one. That's 40% of babies. They're very adaptable, very positive, easygoing. If you've ever heard someone say, "This is such an easy baby, really good baby," they have a flexible temperament. Okay. On the opposite extreme is a feisty temperament. Could also be called difficult temperament, depending on who you're talking to or the situation that you're in. Those babies are typically in a negative mood often. They're unpredictable. They don't have maybe a normal sleeping pattern, eating pattern, structure, routine, etc. Not for lack of trying, right? A lot of parents with feisty babies try to get them on a schedule, get them regulated, and they can't. It's just very difficult with that personality type. So that's the other kind of extreme. And then slow to warm is really somewhere right in the middle. Okay, at first they might be negative. It's just how it sounds. And then maybe over time they adapt, they get used to the situation, they get more comfortable, they feel a little bit better, and they're okay. Again, those 9 characteristics that we use to measure temperament all fit into these 3 categories somewhere. So if you're kind of on this end, typically of all those temperament characteristics, you're probably going to have a difficult temperament. If you're on the other end, probably easy. If you're kind of somewhere in the middle or there's a mixture between those indicators, then you may have a slow to warm temperament. So it's just a way of kind of grouping babies, because the way that we treat them and work with them and support them and deal with them and respond to them is going to matter depending on their temperament type. Okay, so this is called goodness of fit. And basically, goodness of fit is just how it sounds. How do our temperaments mesh? Okay, how do we go together? How do we engage with one another? How compatible are we? And so, if, for example, I have a baby who is a very difficult temperament, and I'm a parent who has a very structured or rigid or regimented schedule, and that baby's not fitting into that schedule or doing what I really need them to do for my success, that's going to be a difficult fit, okay? And it may not be a good fit of temperament types. I've met with some parents who have behavior issues. I had one mom, I'll never forget her. She was super sweet. She was so high energy, just high all the time. Super high energy, really outgoing, very engaging, talked a lot with her hands, and she was just on all the time. She made me tired after an hour being around her. And her son was extremely docile. So he was very quiet, very laid back. He was autistic, so he did not like people in his face or engaging with him regularly or frequently. So mom was having a really hard time bonding with him. And she came, to me for behavior support and said, I can't bond with him. Like, we don't mesh. I'm trying. I'm all excited and ready, right? And he's really resistant to me. And she was really upset as a mom and was having a really difficult time kind of processing those emotions and those things and figuring out that compatibility with him. So goodness of fit is very important for infants and toddlers and for the success of their development and the parent-child dyad in that relationship. If they don't get along, right, then we are going to have a hard time building a close and affectionate relationship. So you'll see some handouts and resources related to this in your work this week. One of them is a scoring sheet, temperament activity it's called, and it's a way of looking at and comparing your temperament with a child that you know. So you can still complete this if you don't have kids or aren't around kids ever. But if you are ever around any kids, this would be a good experience for you to write down, because if there's things that bother you or annoy you or frustrate you, or you don't feel like you get along very well with that child or person, it's probably just mismatched temperaments. And so it's certainly something we can work on and look at. We're looking for synchrony, right? That's our goal. And that's a smooth exchange of responses between the caregiver and the infant. So we want synchrony. If you guys think about synchronous swimmers, they all swim at the same time, right? And they're doing the same thing at the same time. And that's what makes them look good. And that's the same thing we want in a relationship. We want synchrony. We want people to be meshing and working together and jiving and having a good, successful relationship and interactions. So that's what we're looking at and what our goal is for babies. Social referencing, you'll have a question related to this on your walkthrough. Basically, in infant toddler development, babies watch and then they respond, and that's how they learn just about every single emotion. So fearful mothers or fathers raise fearful children, for just as one example. And so we want to make sure that we are responding appropriately to things with babies around and infants and toddlers around, because they're watching. Okay, so lots of fear or worry can harm brain development. The brain grows more slowly when an infant is regularly frightened or frequently frightened. And so even overreactions to things. So like if there's a certain person that walks in the room and the parent goes, "Oh my God, you can't be in here. You're not supposed to do this," whatever. The baby looks, the baby sees that, and over time, the baby's going to develop that same response to that individual if they see it often enough. So they're watching everything that we do, especially when they're little, this age, especially 0 to 2. And we have to really be cognizant of that and make sure that we're aware of our responses to things, the way we react with certain people. If we yell typically in response to anger, when our baby or toddler gets angry, and as they move into preschool, we're going to see them respond that same way. So you're really a very important model at 0 to 2 years old for that baby and that toddler, and for them seeing what's appropriate. That's how they learn, literally, right? This goes right back to Bandura's theory. And so we want to make sure that we're modeling appropriate emotional skills and emotional development. So this still face experiment video you have in Canvas, and you can watch it there. Critical thinking, so you'll have another question to answer related to sort of how to connect the theories to what I've talked about today. And then finally, there's 2 different parenting types, and this is just something kind of interesting to be aware of. Proximal parents are very physically close to the baby. There's frequent holding, frequent touching, frequent engagement, lots of cuddling, lots of snuggling. And distal parenting are parents that are a little bit more distant. So that's the easiest way to remember it. Distal parenting is parents who are distant. Proximal parenting is parents who are in close proximity, right? So pay attention to those root words, and that can kind of guide you with what each one means. Distal parents are not bad parents at all, or unengaged parents necessarily. It just means that they're more distant. They maybe don't pick the baby up as much. Maybe they offer toys, food, and face-to-face communication without touching necessarily, right? So they can be very, very engaged and very, very productive with that child without touching them or holding them a lot. And again, this is just personality, style, and type, right? So not everyone likes to be touched or to hug frequently or whatever. Not everyone's a toucher or a hugger, right? But research has shown that babies actually need, infants and toddlers need that touch. That helps their brain development. It fires the synapses in their brain that are making things stronger and helping things react appropriately and engage with just kind of the neurophysiology of what's happening in the brain. So keep that in mind, even if you're not a hugger, it's important to hold them, pick them up, hold their hands, engage with them, take them on walks, just really spending kind of that close time bonding, reading books, sit them in your lap, right? So we do know, research has shown us that proximal parenting is important and offers a lot of support that distal parenting does not. So it's just something to be aware of and kind of pay attention to if you are more of a distal parent or personality type. Not something bad, again, necessarily. So that's it for this week. I hope you guys enjoy the content and feel like you have a good handle on infants and toddlers. This is our last chapter on infants and toddlers, and next week we move into early childhood. So we've looked at biological, cognitive, and now social emotional development of infants and toddlers. And as you know, especially with Erikson and Freud's theories, everything we've talked about is going to piggyback us right onto to early childhood and to 2 to 6 year olds. And so we need all this info that we have and all this lovely development that we've talked about in order to successfully move into early childhood and our preschool age. So I'll see you guys again next week. Let me know if you have any questions.